My name is Hamza Azhar Salam and you're watching the Pakistan Daily. Today we're going to speak to Sardar Masood Khan, an experienced diplomat and the former president of Azad Jammu and Kashmir. Before we begin the interview, Sardar Saab, I'd like to congratulate you on the successful completion of your tenure as President AJK. The people of Pakistan and AJK thank you for your service.
Thank you so much for inviting me to this conversation. I appreciate it, and I also want to pay tribute to you for your entrepreneurship and the initiatives you have taken in the recent past. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, Sardar Saab. We're extremely grateful to have access to your insights. So Sardar Saab, China is emerging as arguably the most influential player in the region, especially in the context of the US withdrawal and the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan. Various reports suggest that China will also significantly invest in Afghanistan, further increasing their influence. And you've served as Pakistan's ambassador to China and understand the dynamic between China and Pakistan quite well. So how do you view China's growth in the region?
Well, you raised many points, and let me respond to them one by one. China was a great power before the developments in Afghanistan, and it would continue to be a great power in the future because China has the second largest economy in the world, and its geostrategic footprint has also increased exponentially in the past 2 decades. So naturally, because Afghanistan is China's next door neighbor, it has a legitimate role to play in Afghanistan. You also alluded to my period as ambassador in China, and that was from 2008 to 2012. And I can tell you that during that time, China had already made preparations for investments in Afghanistan. In fact, they had developed contacts with the Afghan leadership. Of course, it was a different regime at that time. But they were very careful, even during that period, not to alienate the Taliban. They did not choose sides, as a matter of fact. But the investment plans they had covered copper mining at Iron Copper Field, and also in infrastructure development, also power generation, and so on. They had elaborate plans. As a matter of fact, way back, they were also exploring of these joint special economic zones across the Pakistan-Afghanistan border, because these are adjoining areas. And China had made elaborate plans to invest on both sides of the border so that the complementarity between Afghanistan and Pakistan would increase. They had also in their mind the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor or the broader objectives of the Belt and Road Initiative. So what I want to say is that Afghanistan is directly relevant to China. You know, Afghanistan is a contiguous neighbor of China. And on that side, you have Tashkurgan. On this side, you have Wakhan Strip. So they have a natural interest. You must also keep in mind that some ETIM operatives took refuge in Afghanistan for a very long time. And they wanted to incite a civil war in Xinjiang. And that's why China has been watchful about the developments in Afghanistan. Now, they have been assured by the new Taliban government that ETIM or any anti-China movement would not be tolerated inside Afghanistan, or Afghanistan soil would not be allowed to be used against Chinese interests. So from that point of view, I think that, it clears the deck for greater interaction between China and Afghanistan. It also gives a more prominent role, more pivotal role to Pakistan, because Pakistan is seen in Beijing as the facilitator between China and Afghanistan. They have direct relations, of course, now with the Taliban government, but Pakistan is seen as a good faith facilitator, and they would use to rely on Pakistan's strengths and competencies in this area.
Mm, yes, yes, you're absolutely right. And Sardar Sahab, stability is a major concern in this region. So, do you think China's investments will be enough to curb extremism in Pakistan and Afghanistan, especially from the TTP, which has targeted Chinese citizens in Pakistan before?
TTP has dubious origins, and it has been patently anti-Pakistan, and there are some intelligence leads, which suggested that it was being patronized by India in the past. So TTP is different from Afghan Taliban. First, we must make this differentiation. Second is that your question is different. Your question is whether Chinese investment alone would be able to stabilize the region, Afghanistan and Pakistan. I would say that we have to work on many fronts. First is that in Afghanistan itself, there should be an inclusive government, North and South. It should include Pashtuns, but at the same time, their government and the governmental institutions should also have a representation of the Uzbeks, the Tajiks, and Hazaras. This is a must to steer Afghanistan towards stability. Second is that Pakistan and Afghanistan have to collectively fight terrorism in all its forms and manifestations, because terrorism is still a threat and is exploited by external forces to create instability in both Afghanistan and Pakistan, because Afghanistan has become a major, player in the bipolar politics that is emerging right now. You see resurgence of bipolar politics. United States has pitted itself against China, and it has declared China as enemy number one in so many words. And they were using Afghan soil to watch China, but now that they have been deprived of the territory, they would use other means to encircle China. Therefore, we also need the cooperation and understanding of the United States of America, because if Afghanistan or even Pakistan, if they become a ground for competition between the two powers, one a superpower, the other an emerging superpower, then there would be no stability, because then the strategic landscape would remain volatile, and that's not good for Pakistan or Afghanistan. So we have to fight terrorism. We have to take these major powers on board, United States in particular. They can shift their assets and attention to the Asia-Pacific region, to Southeast Asia, and they have taken very important steps in that direction already. So, but they should spare this region, as a matter of fact, because the people of Afghanistan have seen war and civil wars and drought and unending suffering for the past 30 years, or more than 30 years, 40 years, I would say. It is time to steer Afghanistan towards developments, towards economic development, towards stability. And therefore, we would appeal to the international community, particularly the Bretton Woods institutions, the United States, to help the Taliban bring stability and cohesiveness in Afghanistan. So that would, in addition to China's help for assistance for investment, these initiatives would guarantee stability in the region. A fight against terrorism, a strategic understanding about our own goals, and cooperation of the European Union, United Kingdom, and United States in moving Afghanistan towards stability and security.
Very interesting. And Sardar Sahab, various analysts are predicting the beginning of an Asian century in which the world's political and financial capital will shift from Europe and America to Asia. So what do you think about the Asian century?
given the scientific innovation in the United States and the level of development in European countries, Scandinavian countries, European Union, I don't think that there would be the so-called fall of Europe or fall of the Western countries that is being predicted. That's premature. But one is right in assuming that power would shift to Asia because the world's most prosperous countries are located in Asia. Right now, I mean, you have China, which is the second largest economy, Japan, which is the third largest economy. You have ASEAN region, where, you know, Indonesia, Malaysia, and other countries are doing quite well. So I think that this century belongs to Asia. This century also equally belongs to Africa. I think that Africa's wealth remains untapped, and Africa is on an ascendant curve, I would say, when it comes to development, when it comes to this new consciousness about their role. So I think that this century would belong to Africa and Asia and Europe. Why not? Because since, I mean, even today, you have cutting edge technology in Europe and United States particularly. The level of knowledge that is there has not been matched by other countries. I mean, they're catching up, or they are either emulating or imitating. But I think with the passage of time, the Asian countries would develop their muscles. They have, China has already developed those muscles, or Japan, but there are other countries who have to catch up. And when they catch up, I think that power would shift to Asia, but it doesn't mean that the West would fall or West would lose its relevance or its role in international politics.
Mm-hmm. And Sardar Sahab, in our previous interview, you mentioned that there was a disorder in the world order. And now we've seen that France has recalled its ambassadors from the US and Australia after the nuclear submarine deal between the US, the UK, and Australia. And it has been speculated that the intention behind this deal is countering China's influence in the South China Sea. So how do you think this deal will impact our region and the world at large? And do you think France's actions show that the US is quickly running short of allies?
You can put it that way, but you can also say that this is not a step in the right direction because, you know, the United States calls itself the custodian of non-proliferation. Australia is a signatory to the NPT, Non-Proliferation Treaty, and yet it chooses to power a nuclear submarine and develop a nuclear submarine in the region. And so it is nuclearizing Australia, and it is nuclearizing Oceania, among others. And this has been presented. I mean, this development has been presented a direct threat to or direct deterrent to China. So, I mean, it has accelerated confrontation in the region. This must be understood. So, at this level, the level of proliferation, this is a huge breach. Second thing that you have already pointed out, that Foreign Minister of France has already said that the Anglos, or the Anglo-Saxons, or the English-speaking nations, three of them, they have stabbed Australia, they have stabbed France in the back, as a matter of fact. So, because there was this deal between Australia and France that has been cancelled summarily. They have recalled, I mean, France has recalled its ambassadors from United States and Australia. This is a dire development. And as you have rightly pointed out, there's a fracture in Western alliance because France is a major ally in Europe. United Kingdom is, in fact, after Brexit, is not part of the European Union. And so it doesn't belong to that security architecture in Europe. It has just done, the United Kingdom has just done United States its elder brother's bidding. Australia is a major player. So this would tend to develop cracks in the Western Alliance, within NATO probably, in due course. So I think that we have to watch this development. China has reacted, and China has said that the United States and all these three countries have manifested Cold War mindset, which is true because there's no need for a Cold War. I mean, when there's an emerging power and when there's an established superpower, the best course of action was to cement their ties, and there are very strong ties between the United States and China. But the United States, under a democratic government, which is less radical than the Republicans, has chosen a path of confrontation. So the whole world, I mean, when two titans fight, titans like United States and China, the whole world would become unstable and volatile. It would not just be the regions. I mean, you can't confine such conflicts to Southeast Asia or to the Asia Pacific region. The entire world would be affected. As you've seen during COVID-19, one virus demonstrated that the world was a village, as a matter of fact. I mean, it was, everybody was affected by that lethal pathogen. So when nations of this size and stature start fighting, the entire world, all the supply chains, everything, the economies of the world, they would be affected.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And Sardar Sahab, various analysts are predicting that this deal between the US and Australia is making a military conflict between China and the US inevitable. So in your opinion, do you think we will see a military conflict between the US and China, which represent completely different worldviews in the coming decades?
You know, China doesn't want a war. It has been counseling the United States not to go down the path of confrontation, because that is detrimental to both the nations, United States and United States-led bloc, and to China and China's followers, let's say, in the BRI family, the Belt and Road Initiative family. By the way, in the Belt and Road Initiative family, you can include many, many European countries, many European Union countries in Latin America and many others. I mean, there are more than, I think, 70 countries which are part of the BRI. So war, you have said, is inevitable. I don't think so. Good sense should prevail in Washington and in London and in Canberra. And war should be avoided. It should be averted, because war would deprive people of, and if it's a nuclear war, there would be a nuclear winter, as a matter of fact. There would be a devastation. This would be an Armageddon. I mean, no sane nation would plunge into war. I mean, nuclear weapons can be used for deterrence, but not for actual war. Compared to the bombs that were used in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, nuclear bombs possessed by the United States and even by China have become very lethal. I mean, they are not, they would devastate the entire world. There would be a recession. There would be a global recession. There would be these refugee movements across the globe. And nobody is prepared for that kind of a calamity. Let me also tell you that all said and done, despite all the pockets of volatility that you see around the world, civil wars going on in the Middle East, the world, by and large, is focused on prosperity, on prosperity of nations, of individuals, of communities. So if a war breaks out, either intentionally or by the leaders of the two countries, or inadvertently, or by miscalculation, for instance, that would be devastating for the entire globe, not just for the United States and China.
Yes, Sardar Sahab, you're absolutely right. And Sardar Sahab, let's talk a bit about the US-Pakistan dynamic since after the fall of Kabul. Since President Joe Biden took power, he hasn't even spoken to Prime Minister Imran Khan. In an interview, Imran Khan has said that Joe Biden may be a busy man, which is why he hasn't called. So, what do you think about the future of US-Pakistan relations in the wake of the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan?
You know, in Washington, US leaders ignored Pakistan. They ignored Pakistan after they disengaged from Afghanistan in the 1990s. And this time also, they have started ignoring Pakistan, although Pakistan was the most trusted ally of the United States. And Pakistan gave the maximum sacrifices in the war against terrorism. And yet, the United States has walked away and walked out on Pakistan. And I have seen this pattern in Washington that first they ignore Pakistan, then they repent their decision, then they come back to Pakistan for another transaction, for another mission. I think that this is a very delicate relationship. And misgivings on the part of the United States are very high. Some of them may be probably fact-based. Others are disingenuous because they fought this war with Pakistan. Pakistan fought this war with the United States. It was a very difficult war. It in treacherous terrains and multiple actors and transnational actors participating in that war. And Pakistan, with its limited capacity and capability, tried its best to counter terrorism. And so I would say that the United States should have been beholden to Pakistan. I think even after the fall of Kabul to the Taliban, Pakistan played a very constructive role. And this should have been appreciated in Washington. It has been appreciated in Washington, but only grudgingly. There have been no open statements by the high-ranking officials. So I would say that, but it's a delicate relationship because we need the United States on our side. We do not want to alienate the United States. I mean, the United States has such influence with the European countries and with the Bretton Woods institutions that their hostility can in fact affect our economic development and our financial stability and so on. At the same time, I would say that the message that has been given to the United States is that Pakistan doesn't want to be part of any future strategic environments, and that it would not make further compromises on its sovereignty. Because of these steps that were taken in the past, Pakistan has suffered most grievously, and yet Pakistan's sacrifices have not been sufficiently appreciated in the West. Let me give you a stark example, as a matter of fact. In the past 2 decades, Pakistan was given 34 billion in military and economic assistance, whereas according to statistics compiled by the Brown University of the United States, altogether the United States spent $2.5 trillion in Afghanistan. Now, but the US has always publicized these 34 billion, out of which I think that the bulk of the assistance was for the services rendered by Pakistan. It was Coalition Support Fund, and it was not free assistance, or it was not a grant that was given to Pakistan. But they exaggerate and blow up this figure of 34 billion, but they never mentioned that they invested hundreds of billions of dollars on the Afghan National Army, which collapsed on the day of the Taliban took over. And they have been investing that money on the army, on the Afghan army, year after year. Similarly, I was talking to somebody the other day. I said, look, when the Americans left. I mean, they always boasted about, from George W. Bush to Barack Obama and to Mr. Biden also, they always talked about nation building, that they were building the nation of Afghanistan. And that's why they were there even after they had cleared the immediate threat in Afghanistan. I mean, when they were sure that Osama bin Laden was not in Afghanistan. Now, they had, they never mentioned this assistance that has been given to the Afghanistan government. What I wanted to highlight was that, you see, when the Americans left, the GDP of Afghanistan was 21 billion US dollars, and per capita income of an Afghan is 507 or 507 US dollars, making it one of the poorest nations in the world. Let's assume that if 2 decades ago, the United States had decided to give $100 billion to Afghanistan and not fought a fierce war there for 2 decades, or not gone down the path of so-called nation building, I think economic incentives alone would have wiped out terrorism, and Afghanistan would have been a relatively prosperous country, because all this money has been wasted as far as the people of the United States are concerned. There is no accountability for these funds that have been wasted in Afghanistan, and it hasn't made any impact on the economy or the living standards of the Afghans. All these agencies and NGOs, they've been talking about human development in Afghanistan, but where is the human development in Afghanistan? Probably an urban class was developed there, a modern urban class was developed, and some civil liberties and fundamental freedoms were assured. No doubt about that, and but a new era was ushered in, a new hope was given to the Afghan people. But has there been any human development at the national level? I doubt it.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And even in the context of Pakistan, estimates suggest that Pakistan has suffered a financial loss of over $100 billion in the war on terror and being America's partner. But various voices in Washington claim that Pakistan has played a double game with the US and Western forces. And they claim that Pakistan has been taking money from the West, but they've also been supporting the Taliban throughout that time. So in your opinion, what can Pakistan do to quell this impression which exists in Washington and London and other important Western capitals, which claim that Pakistan may not be a very responsible state in regards to its role in Afghanistan?
Well, you talked about the loss to Pakistan, Pakistan's economy, and you cited a figure of 150 billion US dollars. But I would put it at $500 billion US dollars or $500 million. Why? Because, of course, these are conservative estimates which have been released by the government, $150 billion. I say that it is at least $500 billion because of the denied opportunities to Pakistan. In the past 2 decades, Pakistan was perceived as an insecure state, insecure or unsafe for investments. And that's why I mean, compare it with other nations which were not involved in such as geostrategic conflict. And they have galloped ahead economically. I mean, look at Indonesia, for instance, or Malaysia, or many other countries of the size of Pakistan, or even smaller than Pakistan. They've done well. Even Latin American countries, some African countries have done well, while Pakistan has lagged behind because of this war, the war on terror, the instability, the competing interests. So this is one thing. So in Washington, there should be an appreciation of the losses that Pakistan has incurred. Second thing that I want to mention here, your question, we don't have to give any explanation at all. You know, the intelligence agencies, the government officials there in Washington know the reality. They know that Pakistan had limited influence with the Taliban. Taliban were not subject to Pakistan's diktat. They're quite independent-minded, Afghan Taliban. And, you know, if you read most of the press in coming out of Washington, D.C. or the United States of America, the authors of these reports, and the most vicious reports that have been authored, are from Americans of Indian origin. They're writing in Wall Street Journal, and they're writing in Washington Post and New York Times and other mainstream media. They're propagating, they want to tell the Americans that Pakistan is a nuclear armed state, and it has aided and abetted Taliban. It will continue to do that, and that Pakistan is vulnerable, and all sorts of stories. And so because of this loyalty to the Indian state, even though they are Indian Americans, they are fueling this propaganda in the United States. So don't give any explanations, but in official context, try to impress upon the Americans that we were in this war together, and we've had some successes and some failures. But if there were failures and successes, we should take collective responsibility. We should not start pointing fingers at each other, because Pakistan sacrifices 80,000 people killed, for God's sake. And until recently, Pakistan was the only state in the world which had defeated terrorism definitively. Name any other nation which has done that. And it is Pakistan. And 80,000 people have sacrificed their lives to ensure security of Pakistan, or security of Pakistan from terrorism. It may have saved or protected US interests, or Afghan interests, or the regional interests. And we know the nefarious, mischievous role played by India using the soil of Afghanistan. Most of these Indian Americans who are writing there, they're not highlighting India's role via Afghanistan to destabilize Pakistan, to target Pakistan through acts of terrorism, or to abet subversion, and they have waged this hybrid war against Pakistan. So none of this is highlighted there. In fact, the solution is, instead of giving explanations directly to the National Security Council in Washington, D.C., or the State Department, or to the President himself, who has not spoken to our Prime Minister yet, which is a pity, I would say that we should develop our communication muscles. I mean, we should also write more frequently, more convincingly, more substantively, so that we can also authoritatively put across our point of view. And your paper in this regard is doing a great service, and your new network that is emerging, that is a big stride in the field of communications. And where others have failed, you can succeed, probably.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your kind words, Sardar Sahab. And sir, you've lived a distinguished life as a diplomat, and you've served in the UN, in China, and also recently as a head of state. So what advice would you like to give to younger diplomats and younger people who are interested in statecraft?
Well, the list is long, but I'll be brief. As a matter of fact, what I want to say to the younger diplomats is that excel in whichever field you choose. And you should be second to none. You should be not just a star in Pakistan's foreign service. You should be counted as one of the best diplomats in the world. So that should be your ambition. And when you will have this kind of ambition, your effort would be proportionate to that high ambition. So this is, second is that you have used the word statecraft or, so states are crafted. They are not given to you on a platter. And once the states have been given to you, you have to nurture them, you have to guard them, you have to develop them, you have to build cohesiveness within your own population, you have to carve a role for your state in the comity of nations. So I would say that all youngsters in Pakistan, they should have this ambition that in 20 years' time, they would make Pakistan one of the strongest nations in the world, both economically and militarily. That it should be counted amongst top 10 nations by 2050. So if that is the ambition, then your effort should match that ambition. And is it doable? Yes, it is doable. And I can assure them, I have been in New York and Washington, and I have been in China and many other parts of the world, and I have seen multilateral diplomacy and bilateral diplomacy. And I can give this good news to them, these tidings to them, that if you're determined, you will attain these goals one day and make your nation proud and be counted amongst the top 10.
Yes, Sardar Sahab, you're absolutely right. And in the end, would you like to send any message to the people of Kashmir?
My message to the people of Jammu and Kashmir is that we express full solidarity with them. I'm a Kashmiri myself, but we are on this part of Kashmir, Azad Kashmir. We have civil liberties and fundamental freedoms. We had a free democratic system. Recently, we held elections, and a new party won the elections there. I mean, the party was there for years, but now it won elections. And so there was this democratic dispensation, which was respected by all. On the other side, in the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, people of that occupied territory have been deprived of their fundamental right of adult franchise. As a matter of fact, they have been completely disenfranchised. They are also under siege, under military siege, since August the 5th, 2019. And they've been barred from expressing their views. Their livelihoods are being stolen, their land is being grabbed, and 4.2 million people from India, most of them Hindus, in fact 99% of them Hindus, have been illegally transferred to the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir and domiciled there illegally. So they're in a prison, in a big prison, the people of Jammu and Kashmir. And they are, every day, these young men are martyred. Some 13 to 14,000 young boys, teenagers, probably in their early 20s, some children, 10, 11, 12-year-old children, they are in concentration camps where they're being brainwashed and tortured. So you have these gulags, so these concentration camps, all like, Hitler's Nazi concentration camps. I mean, that's the kind of situation that the Kashmiris are facing. So I would say that we would galvanize the international community. We would step up our diplomatic and political efforts to give the people of Jammu and Kashmir, the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, liberty, freedom, and self-determination. Our effort continues, and my words cannot heal their wounds at all. I'm under no illusion. because they are the most exploited people on the face of the earth. But it's also our vow, and this is their vow, that no matter how dark the night is, we will work for the dawn, not a false dawn, but a real dawn, dawn of liberty.
Inshallah, inshallah. Sardar Sahab, thank you very much for your time. It's always a pleasure speaking to you.
The pleasure is all mine.